Okay. Hey, welcome. Hey, Joe, we're back with another CXO Underground podcast. Lots of things going on. Seems a little bit of a Groundhog Day, but we're hitting a bunch of cybersecurity topics here recently. So, what's kind of going on in the world in regards to cybersecurity these days?
Well, it seems like there's a never-ending story. If it's not, Zoom bombing or, fake websites or clickbait, it's something else. I've had more conversations with people about cybersecurity in the last week, especially, than I have probably in the last 6 months. It seems like a super hot topic for businesses. I think a lot of IT leaders that I talk to are trying to figure out how to convey the criticality and the issues that they see in mainstream media to their executive teams, just to highlight the fact that their companies are at risk too. How about you, Mike? What are you hearing?
Family member had a close family member. I won't name names, but they had a social media account taken away and stole their identity. Fortunately, they weren't posting anything that was inappropriate or of concern. But we're still working on trying to get that back. So definitely kind of lessons learned for all parties involved. But definitely it could be a scary moment, right? With social media, you just don't know the power of that, of using your name. And, again, knock on wood, for right now, there hasn't been anything that's been, you know, out of the ordinary, but it definitely keeps you awake at night. So if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I hear you. It's scary stuff. I imagine it was a phishing attempt or something that caused the problem.
Just didn't know, right? Yeah, somehow changed the account and got a notification. I think it was like the middle of the night, so while you're sleeping, and by the time we were able to get notification out to that social media party. It's just spinning, right? Because some of these companies, right, everything's virtual, and you can't. There's no
Right.
phone number to call, so to speak. I don't know how many inquiries they get for these types of requests, but certainly frustrating from a user perspective, right? But hey, just another lesson learned in regards to how do you lock down your information, right? So
For sure.
so
For
with
sure.
that, we've got a great guest today. Super excited about an influencer. So do you mind introducing our guest for today?
I'll be delighted to. We're very fortunate to have Tammy Moskites here with us today on the podcast, an expert in cybersecurity. She's the CEO and founder of her own business, which we're excited to hear about, CyAlliance. You can see in the background there on her poster there. So we're excited to have her here, and she's got a very wide and diverse background in cyber and has had exposure to businesses around the globe. So, Tammy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Anything that you'd like to highlight in terms of your career that I missed? It's a very high level overview, but I'm sure you can.
Yeah, it was pretty high. Yeah, my background, I've been a career chief information security officer. I've been doing security for many, many years. My career actually started in actuarial department. And so I always was assessing risks and the average likelihood of an event to occur. Although back then it was the average likelihood of death to occur because it was actuarial and underwriting numbers. Now it's more about breach, but I guess it still correlates a little bit in the same. But a lot of what I did really foundationally put me into where I was interested today and what I did in the technology and security space.
It was probably called cybersecurity when you got onto security. What did they call it back then?
Well, actually, it was. I went from the actuarial department into like the help desk organization, and so I was running help desk, and I was responsible for the malware or viruses, as they called them. Just that's the name. It was a virus, but it was well before the concept virus, well before all the macro viruses. It was, the Die-Hard 2 virus that would cause all these damages to major pieces of your infrastructure. And so I was the go-to person. And so they always just, called it the antivirus people or the tech people that did viruses and those types of things. But actually, which was very forward-thinking, when I was at Aetna, we actually had a security department in the late 90s.
Wow.
So we were there and we actually created that from a subset of our help desk.
That's interesting. Yeah. I'm sure you've seen a tremendous amount of change over that period of time in the last 20, 25 years. What are some of the big things that you've seen that have really sort of transformed cybersecurity? What got it on the radar, and how did that impact your career?
Well, for me, a lot of the things that actually helped me in my career to get into the security world and being able to see the changes there have really been around gaining people's trust. Even though it was security and technology, a woman, I'm going to throw the woman card there for a minute, but being a woman in technology and a woman focusing on security and technology, back then it was a lot of administrative focus, right? It's, user account administration, for example. Back then they just called it, computer IDs or computer access. And, that was one of those people that raised their hands and say, hey, we need to centralize this function because who's accessing what in our network is going to be really, really important. And I looked like I had 12 heads and 48 arms because they're like, why the hell do we care? We just people need to do work, right? So back then, the thought of accessing things that you weren't supposed to access and auditing that really was was not even in the forefront of their minds. And as the years go on, the importance of who has access and just-in-time access was something that really became the foundation of a lot of the security controls outside of the virus stuff, obviously.
Sure.
It kind of grew from there.
Yeah, and you mentioned we did notice that you're a female. Mike and I are not, and so you have a unique perspective on the technology field. Just historically been a very male-dominated industry for lots of reasons. I've always had the distinct honor and privilege of working for women throughout my career. What sort of experiences have you had in that regard, and how have you had to overcome sort of that male domination that seems to be prevalent in our field?
Well, it's actually interesting because I was in the actuarial department, as I referred to earlier, and it was interesting because what I did was actually program things to automate the underwriting processes, right? So we used to have all of these folks, there's like 6 of us that worked on trends. And one day the head actuary had asked me to focus on centralizing and making these computers talk to each other, as he said. And I said, that's called an Apple Talk network. This is a long time ago, like I'm aging myself to death, right? And so I took these little Mac SEs, they're those little black screens, and I centralized them, and he goes, that was freaking awesome. He was so happy. He's like, Tammy, let's do a job description. I'm like, okay. So I finally got excited. So I called the Apple folks and I wrote this job description, right? And it was a network administrator. I said, this is a cool job title because I was a senior trend analyst. So for me, flipping it over into something I really enjoyed doing was exciting. And so the big day came, and he was going to announce everybody about this new job. It was like an all hands meeting. So we had a little auditorium, and he got up and he talked to everybody, and he goes, you know what? I want everybody to know that Tammy did this great job. I want to thank her for getting all these computers talking. It's improving the efficiency of the team, blah, blah, blah. He goes on and on. So I'm sitting there all excited in my seat, and all of a sudden he goes, he popped up the job description thing on the screen. And he goes, thank you so much, Tammy. But what I'd like to do is announce who's going to get this role. So I was just getting ready to get out of my seat, and this is not a real name. He goes, Simon, come on up. And I sat there, and I was like, what the hell just happened? Wow. Right? So I sat there, and I was quiet. And, my emotions were getting the most of me. I was trying not to cry and trying not to, yell at him and every other expletive you can think of. And so after the meeting, I went into his office and shut the door quite hard. But I got there, and they said, what the F happened? I mean, literally, I was like, first of all, I'm probably going to get fired because I was so angry. Yeah. And all he did was look at me and goes, Tammy, you did such a great job. But, you wear skirts to work every day. And the idea of you crawling under desks is just not appropriate. So we gave it to Simon.
Wow.
And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. First of all, I didn't wear skirts to work every day. I very rarely wore skirts to work every day. But it was beyond that, right? It was like, just like you couldn't even believe it, right? It's like, did I just hear what I just heard? I just did all the work, all the research, I just did it all. And I've been doing all the support for the team for, since I started. And so, needless to say, yeah, I automated everything. They actually laid us all off in that area because everything was automated and we didn't need to work there anymore. And then I went to help desk. So it was a whole, it's an interesting but true story. And I ended up going to help desk and proving myself there.
Well, you survived and thrived despite all of that.
Well, I'll tell you, so when something lights a fire in your belly like that, you tend to rock and roll, right?
Yeah, was that the moment where you thought that's not going to happen again? And
I said it was never going to happen again.
Yeah.
And the thing is that there was jobs where I was, I know I was in the lead for positions, whether they were the CISO jobs. But I always don't play the gender card, right? Because it's, maybe there's something better about him or her, that they fit better with I might have more skill sets, but they might fit better with the culture. And so, I always took that mindset as well, right? As I moved ahead in my career, because like I said, I wasn't always the first choice, but I'm okay with that, right? You're able to understand that as you mature in your career as well.
So you're talking about, obviously some challenges, right, going on. And that's, again, you built the job description and it pretty much was you, right? Yeah. So during that time, one of the things that comes to mind as a big challenge, if you look at coronavirus, what's going on right now and .com type stuff, but Y2K, any stories around Y2K and how that impacted your career or the business that you were working in?
Y2K was interesting because everybody thought the world was going to end. Right? So
bank accounts were going to stop, right?
Everything was going to stop. Our watches weren't going to work. Nothing was going to work anymore. And, we did have to make some changes and some adjustments. A lot of people worked really hard. But I think that coming up to it, a lot of organizations were well prepared, right? And I think that the ability to have those program managers get us through to make sure that our systems didn't have the 19 something in front of it, and making sure that we weren't screwing with people's birthdays and dates and date of births and things like that. And it was a fun time actually, because I was younger then, should I say? But it was more, we were all all in it together. So I think that that's been the biggest thing, no matter where we are in technology and security for that matter. We're a very tight-knit group, right? So when there's something that has to be done, I think that's probably the most coolest part of this job, right? Is that, 98% of the people are going to jump in.
Especially when it's the whole team too, right? That's the whole team's got to jump in and get things done as opposed to just everybody has maybe different little projects maybe they're working on. Joe, what did you see with Y2K that might tie into kind of Tammy's experience?
Well, it's very similar. I mean, the one thing that I recall from it, lots of funny little tchotchke things that people would produce, and digging through old boxes, you still find some of that stuff now and then. But I think it was the first time that I can recall during my career, and I think I'm older than you, Tammy, is I was the first time that the entire organization that I was working for had an interest and was involved in some way with that project. I mean, it was mostly on the shoulders of IT to remediate, but there was a tremendous amount of interest company-wide. I was working for the Bank of New York at the time, and I remember we had a global map of the global map, and we were watching all of the different Bank of New York entities pass through midnight, and we were all having to be on the phone and report in, and did the world come to an end? And it was really hard to stay awake, I remember, for all of that, because it was really uneventful, but we did learn a lot coming out of it. And I think that teamwork and collaboration aspect was really something that I still remember to this day.
Yeah, and I think that's when BCDR plans started coming into play, right? That's where people start realizing, hey, this isn't going to be a one-time event for just this. What happens if other, catastrophic events or other events happen? And I think that from our disaster recovery activities and building out that team after 2K, I
Yeah.
kind of think of what it was, Y2K, is really when we started building out our organizations in the disaster recovery space.
Yeah. Where in that timeline did the CISO role sort of find its birth? And, because I know the CIO role is still misunderstood after 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
There's a CTO role. People don't understand the difference between them. What sort of parallels have you seen throughout your career as it relates to the profession itself?
Yeah, that's interesting because when I was at Huntington National Bank, so I started there in 2005, I believe it was. I had written the job description for a chief information security officer. I was an information security officer, but they didn't have the C in front of it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about it. So if you think of that was 2005, which was pretty early on, but people still didn't recognize the job title as a job title. I know that prior to that, I worked at Nationwide, and they had just brought on a chief information security officer. So I would say around 2004, 2005, you started seeing it trickling in.
Mm-hmm.
But even though the chief information security officer title was there, they didn't recognize it as a C-level position, right? So it wasn't truly part of the C-suite. In some cases, it was buried down a couple of layers.
Yeah. Are you still seeing that today? I still see a lot of CISOs reporting to CIOs. And what have you seen work well in terms of reporting relationships?
Yeah, it's changing quite a bit in different markets. I've traveled around the world doing a lot of different things, and in different countries, they look at it in different ways as well. But I would still say about 50% at least, like if I look at a worldwide map in Tammy's mind anyway, I'd say at least 50% are still reporting up through the CIO, if not a little higher. A lot of them are starting to report through to the chief financial officer, which I thought was a little weird. Also seen it through general counsel.
I've seen general counsel be, and there's obviously a lot of collaboration with general counsel as it relates to contracts and third-party vendors and making sure all the right provisions are in the contracts. How much of that side of the business do you get exposed to? Just the privacy side and all of that complexity, especially with GDPR and some of the other California regulations that are seeming to be on the horizon.
Well, in my roles as a chief security officer, whether it was at Time Warner Cable or Venafi or Home Depot or wherever, I always had a compliance piece of my organization that focused on whether it was PCI, SOX, et cetera. So we would work closely with internal audit and with our general counsel. It was kind of a group of three that we made sure we kept each other in the loop and informed, and built advisory boards to make sure that we brought in others like the chief financial officer, the CIO, and able to collaborate on changes in law and how it would impact what we made decisions on from a project perspective, where we made our investments.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some chief legal counsels that I've interacted with have become pretty tech savvy, and they become an ally or a partner. Has that been a similar experience on your end as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm finding that a lot of the CISOs that I partner with that do report up through general counsel say that they're starting to get it. But the reason is that they listen and they want to learn more, and they also want to grow that skill set. And the thing is that as we go through breaches, which most of us have been through at least one, and on the other side, we've been through a lot, right, from a consumer perspective. But because our general counsel and our lawyers of our companies need to know what to do in those cases. So they're becoming well-versed in breach, cyber, and sometimes they even get outside counsel's assistance so they can partner and learn. And I find that that's the best way for them to actually understand the impact of not doing something.
Yeah. Cyber is one of those things too that as I've observed and watched over the years, it's become much more diverse, much more complex. And you see people in the roles that aren't necessarily super technical. I think the SANS Institute has some 20 different certifications in cyber. How do you keep pace with the massive changes and the specialized disciplines that seem to be, coming every day in the field?
Right, I hire people really smart, smarter than me. We can't. No one can know everything, and we know that, right? There's just no way. The breadth and depth of security compliance and controls is so wide and so deep that it's really important for the chief security officer or the chief information officer or CIO or whatever to have a good overview of what needs to be done, right? And I have to rely on the experts on my team to help me prioritize and make sure I'm not just doing the right things, but I'm doing the right things right and for the right reasons, right? So I think that, for us to keep involved, a CISO to keep involved, it doesn't make sense in all cases for me to go out and get every certification there is. But, for my directors and for my executive directors, the more that they get under the belt, the easier it is for them to grow into a CISO role. So there's a twofold, right? I'm able to do my job better and I'm able to grow my career.
Yeah, one of the challenges that I still see CIOs and CISOs faced with is, how do you communicate the importance of cybersecurity to the executive team, to the board? What information do you share with them? Because there's a wealth of, data that you could spray at them. How have you sort of handled that challenge, especially in the last year or two?
Well, I work a lot with boards. But prior to starting my own company last year, I worked for Accenture for a couple of years, and I had North America security practice for retail and hospitality specifically. And I talked to boards and I talked to executives day in and day out, but they don't want to know how many viruses they had or how many times, somebody tried to break in through the firewall or how many tickets you had open. What they want to know is, here's our top business priorities, right? What are the risks to the business, right, if we do nothing? And what do we need to do in order to make these projects that are going to run our business with the least amount of impact, right? So